Right. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on what are evidence-based practices in autism and why should we use them. I am really excited to introduce our presenter today, Patty Shetter, who is with the Mind Institute and is the coordinator for the California Autism Professional Training and Information Network, more shortly known as CAPTAIN. I've had the good fortune to work with Patty for many, many years, and have been part of the CAPTAIN team for also a long time. So the Family Resource Centers Network of California is really pleased to bring Patty to you today. And the network has also been part of CAPTAIN since the beginning. If you aren't familiar with the network, then I would invite you to visit our website, which I think is probably going to be in the presentation at some point, and look us up. I guess with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Patty, and let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, everyone who's here for the webinar. We have about an hour of time, and I have a lot of information to be able to share with you today. But you'll notice on the bottom of the slide is the web address for the CAPTAIN website. Everything that I'm going over today, including the PowerPoint presentation, can be found there. So don't worry if you missed something, or if you're needing copies of things, everything is available there on the website. So I want to start by just giving a brief introduction to CAPTAIN. As Debbie said, CAPTAIN stands for the California Autism Professional Training and Information Network. We are a multi-agency network that was developed to support the understanding and use of evidence-based practices for individuals affected by autism spectrum disorders across California. Our vision in developing CAPTAIN was really to establish a statewide training and technical assistance network that focused on research-based and evidence-based practices for autism, but that was inclusive of stakeholder agencies who could disseminate information at the local level. CAPTAIN's goals include increasing knowledge about autism and evidence-based practices through systematic dissemination of information. This webinar is a great example of that. Our second goal is to help increase the implementation of those practices in schools and communities, so they're being used well and they're being used right, so that people can realize the ultimate benefits of these practices. And our third goal is to increase interagency collaborations and standardize a process for using evidence-based practices. I know there's nothing more frustrating as a parent than hearing 3 different things from 3 different agencies and not really knowing where to go next, and you know, maybe even who to believe. But this network has really brought together some of the key stakeholder agencies and allowed us to agree upon and really understand what the evidence-based practices are, and in order to help families be able to use them. CAPTAIN is also part of the statewide system of support with the California Department of Education. We are the content lead supporting schools in building their capacity to understand autism and understand evidence-based practices, and we do that in partnership with the Marin County SELPA. Debbie mentioned that the Family Resource Center Network of California is one of our partners in California. We have multiple partners, including the Department of Developmental Services, the regional centers, the California Department of Education, the UC Davis Mind Institute, which is where I'm from. And all of these partners have really invested a lot of energy and time since 2013 developing this network and developing resources for people to learn about and use evidence-based practices. So it's been a really amazing collaboration, and we're really fortunate to have such amazing partners on this project. So, no surprise to any of you, one of the main reasons why CAPTAIN was formed and was necessary is because we've seen this steady increase in the number of individuals in California diagnosed with autism. And this graph that I'm showing just really illustrates that trend in our California public schools since 2010. And we have the updated numbers of the California students between the ages of 0 and 22 who are affected by autism. Right now, there's 132,359 students being educated in our public schools who have autism as a primary disabling condition for IEP services. And that makes up about 16.5% of the total students with disabilities population. So we're the third largest disability category behind only learning disabilities and other health impairments, speech and language impairments, sorry. So those numbers have really driven a huge need, a significant need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of individuals with autism and their families in an efficient and an effective way using evidence-based practices. So autism treatments are very broad and very vast. If you were to actually go onto Google and search the term autism treatments, you would get over 2 million different responses. Now, we know that there are not 2 million research-based, evidence-based practices out there. So these results clearly are inclusive of lots of different things that people claim are treatments for autism. So the many treatments for autism that are out there are incredibly diverse, more than any other known disability. And the claims of these treatments really range from amelioration or addressing specific target behaviors or symptoms, all the way through to promising a recovery from the condition. Many interventions have really no scientific evidence at all, but are often recommended for individuals with autism. So we're really trying to promote and educate people and help people understand how to be good consumers of these treatments and services. And one of the most important things that anyone can do is to really look for those treatments that are research-based and that are considered evidence-based practices. An evidence-based practice is an intervention or practice which has scientifically based research that demonstrates that it's effective. And these practices really rely on rigorous and systematic procedures in order to deliver them so that the consumers end up with reliable results. So fortunately, we don't have to rely on Google to figure out what these evidence-based practices are. And we don't have to go through the scientific research journals to figure out what these evidence-based practices are. Fortunately, there are a couple of different national groups who have consolidated all of the research findings for us, and this is really the basis of Captain's work. So I'm going to go through and tell you a little bit about each of these projects so that you understand what they are. The manuals that you're seeing here on the screen are available and accessible through the Captain website. There's a link to each of them if you have an interest in going through them a little bit more thoroughly. The one on the left is the evidence-based practices for children, youth, and young adults with autism. That was just released in April of 2020. And this one really focuses more on the 0 to 22 population. It was funded through the Office of Special Education Program. So they're really looking at what the research suggests is effective for school-age individuals. The report on the right, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about first, was released in 2015. And this is the National Standards Project put out by the National Autism Center. And this report really looked at treatments across all ages. So that National Standards Project report looked at the research that was published from 2007 through 2012. They looked at 351 articles for the 0 to 22 population and a total of 27 articles for the adult population. And you can see right there, there's a huge disparity in terms of the number of research studies that have been dedicated to adults. And this report really brought that to light, and a lot more research now is being done and being looked at in terms of what can support adult individuals with autism. They classified the evidence into 3 different categories. So when they were looking at these research studies in the peer-reviewed journals, they could be defined as either established practices, emerging practices, or unestablished practices. So those that they characterized as established really had sufficient levels of evidence available, multiple studies really that demonstrated a favorable outcome. So they were replicated and they were verified by multiple researchers. Those things that they classified as emerging do have some research to support them, but perhaps there isn't yet enough research or enough studies done by different organizations or different individuals to be able to conclusively determine that practice's effectiveness. So that's characterized as an emerging practice. And then, of course, unestablished are those practices where there really is no evidence, no studies have been done, or perhaps there have been studies done, but they're not conclusive, or one study contradicts the other study. So it really hasn't been established yet that whatever the treatment or program is effective. So using those criteria, the National Standards Project identified 14 interventions that they considered as established evidence-based practices. And they're listed here, and I'm not going to spend time today going into each one of these, but just know that these are 14 that did have that substantial level of research supporting their effectiveness for individuals with autism. And this was for individuals birth to 22. They found 18 of them that fell within that emerging category for individuals from birth to 22. And those are listed here. And then 13 that were considered unestablished. No research supporting them or contradictory research or studies that didn't really meet the rigor for a scientific study. So 13 unestablished. And I know sometimes people look at this and they go, oh my gosh, but I really believe in, or I really am interested in that particular intervention that's listed here. And so, you know, it's good to know what these unestablished interventions are. And we always encourage people to look at those established and emerging practices first, because it's pretty likely that there's an evidence-based practice to be able to meet a need that you're looking to be able to meet for your child. For the adult population, like I said before, the research literature is pretty sparse. And so based on those articles they reviewed, they really only found one established evidence-based practice for adults, which is behavioral interventions. And there it was, at the time of this publication, one emerging practice, and that was vocational training packages. So they're going to be republishing this, doing a more updated research review, probably in the next year, we've heard. So I'm encouraged that there'll be a lot more to be able to draw from for the adult population when they look at the research literature that's been done. So I'm going to move on now to the National Clearinghouse on Autism Evidence and Practice report. This one is really like hot off the press. It was released just 2 months ago in April of 2020. And this is actually an update of a previous report that was put out in 2014 by the National Professional Development Center for Autism. And they updated that report to include the research literature all the way up to 2017. So the definition of an evidence-based practice for this particular review was a little bit different. They weren't looking necessarily at comprehensive packages. They were looking at what they call focused intervention practices that have evidence of efficacy in promoting positive outcomes for learners, in other words, students with autism. And again, that's because this particular project was funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. So the interest here is in identifying for school-age individuals what works. Little bit different than the other publication that I shared. They actually looked at a lot of different types of research and considered things like group design research, as well as single subject design research, and included things that also had a combination of those different types of research. So much more inclusive of a variety of different types of research, this report is compared to the National Standards Report. Based on this review, they found 28 evidence-based practices, and they're listed here. And again, I'm not going to go into each one of them, but I think the good news at seeing that there are 28 is that we have so many different practices that research has supported to choose from, depending on the needs of an individual child and what it is that you're looking to address. So lots of choices. The other thing that that this particular report outlined are manualized interventions that meet criteria as an evidence-based practice, and they call them the MIMCs. And these really are interventions, practices that have been manualized and have been published and are commercially and publicly available. Many of them do require that the users get certified in how to do them so that we can make sure that we're doing them well. And I'm sure that many of these look familiar to a lot of you. The Picture Exchange Communication System, PECS, is an example of one of these manualized interventions. The Peers Social Skills Training Program is another, and Social Stories, which I know many people are really familiar with. That falls under the category of evidence-based practice called social narratives, but it is a manualized intervention for how to develop a social narrative in a particular style. They identified those things that do not have sufficient evidence or that have conflicting evidence. So these are things that are really commonly used or recommended, but that don't have any research, or that the research is really inconclusive at this point. These are things that are often recommended. So auditory integration training and sensory diets, you'll see I have a star next to those. There are definitely studies out there on both of these interventions, but the outcomes have been contradictory or conflicting with one another. So these are not established yet as practices that, that can be used reliably to improve outcomes for individuals with autism. All right, so in the manual, they have done a really nice job of outlining what each of these practices are. And you'll see for each of the 28 evidence-based practices inside that manual, there's a definition, the age range that it's appropriate for, the outcome area that it can be used to address, and then all of the research articles that supported it in the evidence base. They also developed this sort of intimidating looking matrix to be able to summarize on one page what the evidence-based practices are and what age groups and what domains they address. Now, I know it looks really intimidating at first, but this is such a usable tool when you're trying to make decisions and determinations about what the possibilities are for addressing a particular goal or area of need for an individual. So I'm going to walk you guys through how to use this, and then it is available on the Captain website with a supplementary tool that we developed to help make it a little more user-friendly. So let me explain this really quickly, and then we'll do a little couple of mock activities to help you guys really understand how to use it. So down the left-hand side is the abbreviation for each of those 28 evidence-based practices. Now, what Captain has done is taken those abbreviations and created sort of a glossary on one page that you guys can use. So ABI is antecedent-based interventions, and then we have a brief definition of what that actually means. So the evidence-based practice abbreviation's there on the left, and if you want to know more about what that is, you can use this glossary to get some additional information. But on the chart, across the top, you'll see academics and pre-academics, adaptive, self-help. You'll see all of the different skill areas or domains that are really common areas of need and areas that we would have IEP goals developed for an individual with autism. And under that, directly under that, you'll see the age ranges. Ages 0 to 5, ages 6 to 14, ages 15 to 22. So if the particular domain under that age has the color representing that age group, that box filled in, that means that it is established for that age group to address that particular skill or goal area. So let's do a little practice. Let's say that you are the parent of, or an IEP team member of, or a service coordinator supporting little Lucia, who is 5 years old. She's on the autism spectrum. She's presently nonverbal. And right now she's having some tantrums or grabbing things that she wants and needs in order to communicate. So the goal here is that instead of doing those tantrums and grabbing behaviors, that she'll learn to request items and assistance from others on 8 out of 10 daily opportunities as measured by the teacher collected data. So the first thing we have to do in thinking about that is, what is this particular goal targeting? So you could look at it and say, well, it's targeting behavior, and yeah, it clearly is. We're wanting to reduce the tantruming and grabbing. But ultimately what we're wanting Lucia to learn is communication. So communication's the domain that we would most likely be looking under. So if we go back to that evidence-based practice matrix, I have highlighted here that communication domain for the ages of 0 to 5. Anything that's highlighted there in yellow has been established as an evidence-based practice that could help with this particular area and domain. And you'll notice for communication, there's lots of them. In fact, all but 3. So we have 25 different evidence-based practices to choose from. And we'd want to look at each of those in order to determine what's the most appropriate fit. Fit for Lucia, but also fit for individuals who might be working on this goal with her. So one of the things that the team might consider is AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. And so after you've identified what that evidence-based practice is, I'm going to review with you in just a minute what some of the additional resources are that you can access to learn more about it and to learn how to implement it effectively. So those tools that I just reviewed with you, the matrix and the little definition cheat sheet, they're on the Captain website. Under the Captain resources, you just click on the Captain website and type in Captain resources, and it'll take you to these. And we do have these available in both English and in Spanish. We get asked a lot of times, how do these 2 reviews that were done, these 2 publications, how do they compare to one another? And really, there continues to be a substantial overlap between the 2 reports. Nothing really contradicts each other. They just classified the practices in a little bit different way. But if you are interested, or if you want to look more closely at the overlap, the NCAEP, the NCAP report, has on page 48 a nice little chart that shows the intersection and overlap of the 2 different projects and what those findings were. So to summarize Captain's recommendations, and what we're really hoping people will do is to really consider first those 28 evidence-based practices from the NCAP report and the 14 interventions from the National Autism Center report. We want you to consider these practices first. because they do have that research supporting them, and you'd have a high probability of having some nice outcomes if you use these practices. And for those of you who are parents of or supporting adults, right now, even though the pool is small, consider the established intervention for adults, which includes behavioral interventions. Okay, so now you know what these practices are. You know that you have a trusted resource to be able to go to be able to find the practices and figure out which ones work for which kinds of skills and which age groups. What's next, though? It's not enough just to know what these practices are. We actually have to get them implemented. So step one of implementation really is about increasing knowledge about the evidence-based practice in preparation for its use. So the autism-focused intervention resources and modules, AFFIRM, are a free resource that was developed through the National Professional Development Center for each of these evidence-based practices. These are free modules for anyone to be able to use. All you have to do is register. It is a grant-funded project, and so they like to know who's using them and from where, and whether you're a parent or a teacher or a paraeducator or a service coordinator. They want to know a little bit of demographics about who the users are, but they are free to be able to use. What you'll learn with these AFFIRM modules, they provide a really nice outline of the key components of each EBP, the behaviors and skills that can be addressed with each of the practices. They have step-by-step guides and videos that illustrate the process of applying these practices. And then there are specific resources that can be downloaded and customized for your own use. One of the ones that we often recommend to people who are just sort of learning about evidence-based practices is this particular module. It's a short overview on how to select evidence-based practices. And so that's available through AFFIRM, or the website is listed there on this particular slide. Another one that's a great introduction and super helpful to anyone who's just learning about autism. We have the Introduction to Autism module on AFFIRM, and it helps people to really learn and understand what the characteristics and learning needs of individuals with autism are. In addition to that, each of those practices has its own individual learning module, and each lesson sort of takes you through the process of using that specific evidence-based practice. But there's also these great documents that they've developed, and you'll see the arrow on this slide is pointing to a parent's guide. So this is a user-friendly, usually 1 or 2 page summary of each of the EBPs. With some information about how families can use the practice in the home and in the community. And some of the other documents are some tip sheets, some data collection sheets. They have step-by-step practice guides that kind of are, I kind of call them the recipe for how to use each practice. And then, of course, there are video examples of each of the practices for people to be able to look at in order to see what the practice looks like actually in play with a student or a child with autism. Again, want to remind you guys, these are all free. All you have to do is register, and they're available there for use. They also just released 2 modules, one on reinforcement and one on prompting, that have been made specifically for paraeducators. So it takes out some of the content about how to actually design a lesson or a lesson plan using the practice, and really just focuses on the implementation side of things. And the feedback that we've gotten is that these are really great for the paraeducator as well as for families, because it takes out a lot of the development side of lesson planning. That report that we've been talking about, the NCAPE report, like I said, it just came out April 2020. So they're having to do some updating to the Affirm modules to add the new EBPs that were identified, and to adjust some of the modules to take account for new research. But they are working on that. So if you're looking, for example, for the module on behavioral momentum, it's one of the newer evidence-based practices that have been identified, and it will be there soon, but it's not quite there yet. But most of the others are there and accessible. I'm sure many of you are working with and supporting young children with autism, and they've created a special series of modules for toddlers with autism. So this is a little add-on that has a lot of those same resources as I was showing you with the Affirm modules, but they're geared more towards the younger end, the 0 to 3 population. And so there's a link to this on the Captain website, but also the website is available there for you all to look at. And they also have developed a specific set of resources for those of you working with high school and transition age individuals. You know, I think it's helpful a lot of times to see videos of the age group that you're actually working with, rather than trying to think about, well, how would this look with a high schooler? They've curated a lot of the resources here for the older group as well. And that's the Center for Secondary Education for Students with Autism. You can get there through the Captain website, or the link is provided there for you as well. Okay, I think I'm going to just do a quick check-in with Debbie and Karen to see if there have been any questions before I go into this next section.
All right, so this is the time. If you have a question that's been bugging you, you haven't typed it in yet, do it now. We do have one here. Does Captain make any effort to disclaim the unestablished interventions to help families and professionals to explain why they are not established, harmful, conflicting, or contradictory?
Great question. So we definitely, our message is really to encourage people to select from the many established interventions before considering those that don't have any research or that have conflicting research findings. That's definitely our message. You know, and I think with good reason. You know, I'm a parent, and I've been through the process of developing an IEP for my own child, and then working with the team to try to figure out, well, what are we going to do to actually address this goal? And I mean, with so many goals and such little time, I want to pick something that I have pretty good evidence is going to work. I don't want to experiment and try to figure it out whether or not it's effective or not. I want to go someplace that, you know, we already know, you know, something's been established. So, you know, I think it's a time saver to know what these practices are, and to really try to hone in on and select those things that are evidence-based. And definitely our message as a network has been, you know, there's probably an EBP to address the need that you're looking for that has been established by research, that has some you know, high likelihood of being successful if it's implemented. Let's go there first. That's the message that we want to send.
All right, thanks. Okay, no other questions right now.
Okay, so I just want to kind of weigh in a little bit on why these two EBP resources are so important, and really answer that question of, well, why does it matter? Why should we consider evidence-based practices? And so, you know, really it helps us to know which treatments have been demonstrated to be effective, narrows the 2,400,000 down to just 28 that we can identify and select from. It allows people to be able to really make informed decisions when selecting the treatments, and you know, be informed consumers of the services and practices that can be and should be used to address the needs. And really it provides us with the opportunity to support individuals with autism in reaching their full potential. With the limited amount of time that we have to address some skills we want to make sure that we're doing it efficiently and effectively to be able to move on to the next skill or the next area of need that comes up. So those are three really important reasons. Another reason, and I know this slide looks overwhelming, as does the next, and I'm not going to go into the each education code or each policy, but I think it's really important for people to recognize and know that evidence-based practices are required. It's written into the language of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that the intervention selected to address those IEP goals should be based on peer-reviewed research. The Every Student Succeeds Act has language in there around evidence-based practices. California Ed Code, the California Senate Bill 946, which was the legislation that allowed for medical insurance billing of autism services, has the language in there. The Lanterman Act for the regional center, as well as the ethical obligations of many professionals. The American Speech and Hearing Association, I have the language from their ethical guidelines in there that their practitioners, speech and language therapists, should be using evidence-based practices. So, it's really a requirement that these practices be used and be considered above those things that don't have any research or evidence. But I think the most important reason is really obvious. The reason that you use them is because they work, and they can be really effective. So this is the most important reason, I think, why everyone should consider and really make an effort to use evidence-based practices. So one of the amazing resources that have come out of our partnership with the Family Resource Center Network of California is some infographics, some really simple 1- and 2-page print materials that describe everything I've described for you today in an hour-long webinar, but on one page. So this infographic is available in English and in Spanish, and it's really designed to help explain to families what evidence-based practices are, and understand why they're really important and what the benefits to the family could be. And then at the very bottom, you'll see there are links to all of the resources that we've talked about today. Links to the National Autism Center, links to the Affirm modules, links to the Captain website. So just a summary of those kind of key resources that we would want parents to be looking at first in order to explore and learn more about evidence-based practices. And so this is available on the Captain website, and I believe that Debbie also attached it, so it's available for you all through this webinar as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Again,
it's in your handout pane. That's at the very bottom. I think it's probably the last thing in your control panel, and you can just click that open and download them directly.
So this is the one-pager for families, and then our work group also developed a little bit more expanded version of this for professionals who are providing family support. So same kind of information, but really, geared towards the individuals who are supporting families and helping families learn about the evidence-based practices. So these are on the website, attached to your handouts in English and in Spanish. And we're looking at ways of being able to get them translated into additional languages as well. So stay tuned. More to come on that, but right now we do have them available in both of those languages. All right, I'm going to pause again real quick for questions before I go into the final set of resources, which are really a curated set of COVID-related resources that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of.
Great. I was just going to say, Patty, we have some questions. So perfect. Great minds. I work as a home visitor with kids birth to 3. What's the best way to approach parents with the subject of autism?
Great question, and definitely a tricky one in terms of that early age group. because, you know, the child may be identified for early start or may be identified because of some deficits that are apparent, but the families may not yet have a diagnosis of autism. So there's a couple of different things that I would say. You know, early diagnosis is important because it leads to early intervention. And we know early intervention, there's an overwhelming amount of research to indicate that that is really important and really critical for any child. But, you know, we have a lot of evidence suggesting that early intervention is really imperative for kids with autism, because we can get in there early and ameliorate a lot of the challenges and sort of set the developmental course a little bit back on the trajectory. However, it can be an incredibly tricky conversation to have, and you guys know that families are at different places at different times. So I think that, you know, definitely talking with them and giving them the words and possibly the courage to bring up the developmental concerns with their pediatrician. And they don't have to say the A word, you don't have to say the A word, but really helping them to define what the skills or the behaviors are that are causing them concern, and practicing how to voice that. And we have a link on the Captain website to an amazing resource developed by the Center for Disease Control, the Learn the Signs, Act Early resources. Tons of amazing developmental milestone trackers and information on that website. But they also have an app that families can use to be able to track their child's development and when those milestones are reached. And that can be another way of being able to really support a family, you know, is to help them to be able to learn to track the milestones and take that information to the physician to be able to share the concerns.
That's great. And also, Lori, our questioner, if you haven't had a chance to get in touch with your Early Start Family Resource Center in your area, they could probably also give you some sort of tips in talking to families and also be a resource to the family. Okay. Can you please comment on the issue of over-relying on one or just a few EBPs? In my experience, many schools and service providers use the same few EBPs for all learners with ASD, when the best practice is matching the EBP to the target skill combined with the target settings and the prerequisite skills displayed by the learner. Providers need to understand the process of selecting the best EBPs to address the given issue with a given child in a given setting.
Yeah, well, you just hit the nail on the head. A lot of times it's a deficit on the part of the implementer in terms of how to actually select EBPs. So, you know, we go with what we know. We usually do the things that we're most comfortable with. And I think we see a lot of that, you know, in education. Somebody's trained in PECS and they feel really confident with it, but they, you know, have a very limited familiarity with a different type of AAC or a higher tech option. Maybe they don't know where to go to even learn more about that. So, you know, I think that helping to make people aware of the range of evidence-based practices. I mean, we've been doing this work for Captain since 2013, and every time I'm in front of a group of educators, I ask them, how many of you are aware of these 28 EBPs? And very few hands go up, and that's in a room full of special educators, you know. So that dissemination of the information and making people aware that there are more than just a handful, there are 28 of them, and then sharing with them these resources so they can familiarize themselves more and develop more skills in being able to use the range is really important. But yeah, I think, you know, we default to what we know and what we're most comfortable with. The module on EBP selection, though, does a really great job of helping people think through, excuse me, those other aspects of EBP selection, matching it to the learner and the context and the parent preference.
All right, we got a couple. We had somebody ask about the app for the child's development. I could answer that one. So the app is called the Milestone Tracker, and it's on the Centers for Disease Control website, or I think you can go into the App Store and just put CDC Milestone Tracker, and you'll get the app. And it's Spanish and English. Somebody else shared a earlylearninginstitute.com is also a wonderful group. And then we had in our county, our regional center offers autism evaluation for possible autism when a child is closer to age 3. Is that too late?
So again, it sort of goes back to the most important thing is that they're getting interventions. So if they are qualified for early start and are getting, really good interventions and proper interventions, then age 3 is a pretty stable time to be able to make a diagnosis. But generally the consensus is the earlier the better. So the earlier that a trained and qualified professional can really identify the needs and get a treatment plan in place, the better.
All right. Some of these practices are beneficial for any kids with behavior challenges without ASD. Can we encourage families of kids without an autism diagnosis to view the Affirm modules?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great resource. And you're absolutely right. A lot of these practices, in fact, we have some infographics on the Captain website that show the alignment of these EBPs with some other practices. Sorry, Debbie.
It's okay.
I have a little tickle in my throat. It's not a technology failure, it's a person failure.
Well, I'll take another one while you're doing that. So Claire shares that you can also get a pamphlet on the milestone tracker from CDC and they'll mail it for free. Yes, thank you, Claire. You guys, you don't have warms my heart to see you all shouting out about Learn the Signs Act Early. I spent 5 years as an ambassador for Learn the Signs Act Early. So to see it all coming back is great, to see that it's being used in the community. So great resource. Put aside like 3 hours if you decide to go to the CDC Learn the Signs Act Early website and start to tool around. And then, one of our Captain Cadre shares your local Captain Cadre may be able to help educate and train local school districts on the various EBPs.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you. I was going to go there as soon as I stopped coughing.
Yeah.
On the Captain website, you'll find a link to the Captain Cadre. Now, we have over 400 members of the Captain Network across the entire state, from school districts, from the regional centers, from the family resource centers, and every region has Captain Cadre that are available there. And what we ask our cadre to do is help us to be able to do training and dissemination of these resources. So if you're in a situation where you feel like your team or the school that your child's attending may benefit from additional training, on the Captain website, look up those Captain Cadre, find your people, send them emails, start a communication, because they are absolutely available and accessible, and they are amazing trainers and can come out and really support the work of implementation. The other thing I'll say about that is, building awareness is step one. Actually doing it is a little bit trickier, and so the cadre also are available to go into classrooms and provide coaching to teachers and school teams to learn how to implement it correctly or with fidelity.
All right, let's go. Got them all.
Okay.
So far.
All right. So I'm going to move on to the very last set of resources that I wanted to share with all of you. When the pandemic hit and we were, really faced with this huge challenge of how do we support families and how do we support the educators in making this shift to in-home instruction and to virtual learning. One of the things that Captain did with many of our amazing collaborators is developed and sort of collated these resources for families and teachers to be able to use during the COVID crisis. And so we put it on a Padlet, which is kind of like a little mini website if you're not familiar with Padlets. But these are really carefully selected resources that can provide a lot of information and support. The one that I'm showing you on the screen now is an English language version. We have a Spanish language version as well. On the left-hand side are resources to explain COVID-19 to students with autism. And there's a series of different social stories and social narratives and visual supports that can really help with the explanation of COVID-19, and things like why are we doing school at home now, and why do I see my teacher on the screen instead of in person, and wearing masks, and a lot of the different issues surrounding this pandemic. We have resources for parents to support home learning. So we've linked to some of the really important evidence-based practice and affirm modules and provided some resources there for parents. The next column is resources for educators to support distance learning. And there's a guidance document there, for really helping teachers to, kind of take step one as step one, and how to collaborate with families, because we know that a lot of the responsibility and a lot of the teaching that's going on is happening because families are doing it and teachers are now in a different role of guiding. So we have a lot of resources there in terms of that parent-professional collaboration and guidance. And then we've also collated some different apps and resources to help support learning and behavior and skill maintenance during this time of home instruction. I have the link to the Padlet there on the slide, but we also have it front and center on the Captain website. Right when you go to the website, it's right there at the very top, so you can click to a link. We did the same thing in Spanish, so we have many of the same resources, but in Spanish language, and a few others that were available in Spanish that we didn't actually have in English. So they're available there on the Spanish language Padlet as well. And there are some of the social stories we also have in Chinese, in Mandarin. You can find those on the English language Padlet. We don't have enough curated yet in other languages to develop an independent Padlet, but we do have some of those social stories available in Mandarin. And there's a screenshot there when you go to the Captain website, www.captain.ca.gov. Right there at the very top are the links to those Padlets, so you can access those really easily and really quickly. All of those resources are available, but we also are very active on social media. Our team really uses all of the different social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a YouTube channel that has lots of different videos and webinars that we've recorded and things like that available. So follow us on social media. We post usually several things a day, but any new information about policy, research, practice on autism will usually end up there pretty quickly. So that's a great way to sort of stay in touch with what's happening. And in addition, check out the Captain website. So I'm going to end, and we do have, it looks like, a few minutes more for questions, with a quote that I think is really an important driver of the work of Captain. Look, we know these EBPs are out there, and there's lots of research-based practices, but children and families can't benefit from evidence-based practices that they do not get to experience. So we want children and families to know about these, to be able to benefit from these, to be able to expect these are the things that are being implemented when you're consuming services and when you're advocating for your child. We want you to be advocating for these specific practices, because the chances are, if they're being done and they're being done well, that you'll realize the benefit and your child will realize the benefit of these practices. I have my contact information here, and you're welcome to reach out, as Debbie said at the beginning of the webinar. If you have additional questions, if you need a resource, I'd be happy to see if I can put you in contact with a proper resource to address whatever need that you're having. And like I said, we have this amazing cadre of over 400 people throughout California in your local area with your regional center, with your family resource center, and with your SELPAs, your special education local plan areas, your schools, who are really doing the work, getting this out there and helping to support the vision and the mission of Captain, which is to ensure that people are aware of and using these practices for individuals with autism. So Debbie, Karen, are there any final questions?
We do have a couple of more. Yvette Baptiste, who is the chair of our Family Resource Centers network, is offering to provide information to any family support agency if they want to know more about understanding and disseminating evidence-based practices. So if you don't know Yvette already, you can email me or Patty and we'll get you her contact information. And then there's a question, is there any information on parent support or sibling support groups?
Great question. So the UC Davis Mind Institute website has a link for sibling support. And we actually train trainers and run sibling support groups, throughout the Northern California region, at least. As far as a FIRM module or an evidence-based practice, I would send you to look at peer-mediated instruction and interventions. That's the place where you'll find, the sibling support and the peer support and all the information around that.
And I would also encourage you to go to your local Early Start Family Resource Center or your Family Empowerment Center or Parent Training Information Center. A lot of them also run local support groups for both siblings and parents. All of them online, of course, now, but yeah, okay, we're getting lots of thank yous. Okay. Any closing thoughts, Patty?
Just thank you so much. This partnership has been invaluable in helping us to get this information out to families and providers. So thank you to the Family Resource Center Network of California for sponsoring and hosting and organizing this webinar. And thank you to everyone who spent your afternoon learning about these resources. Please, help us in disseminating this information. We have so many Californians that need to know and that still don't know about these resources and about evidence-based practices. So, we need to all do our best to really help get the information out to providers and families.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pat. I'd like to thank Karen Bohal-Ortega, too, who was backing me up on the questions today with such a great large audience with us. Again, wonderful to see all of you, and you will get a follow-up survey which pops up, and a lot of it helps us sort of gear our professional development. And there's also a couple of questions that are specific to this PowerPoint that you will help Captain with our all of our training and information needs going forward. So we appreciate your it's short, taking a couple of times for you to couple of minutes for you to answer that. And I guess that's it for today. And we'll look forward to seeing you all at another time. Thanks for joining us.